think this is the proper way to think about it. Your target should be smaller than your market, and you recognize that people outside of your target will find relevance in what you do, and they will be attracted to you as well.
Aloha and welcome to the Groundswell Marketing Podcast, where I connect you with outstanding humans and innovative, sustainable ideas. Today's guest was an exceptional one. I literally just finished the recording. I wanted to jump on and just acknowledge him. Today we had Blair Enns. He's the founder and owner of a company called Win Without Pitching. I'd say he's the world's top expert in value-based pricing. His value proposition is he helps creative professionals win more business at a higher price and at a lower cost of sale. And he teaches them more or less how to really navigate the unique challenges that when you're a creative to value your business and, negotiate the highest possible price. It's an incredible process, and it's a very difficult thing because if you're in the advertising industry, it's not something that comes by easily because it's very subjective. So we cover off a little bit about how he came up with it. We talk about the process of that, the principles, and how do you actually do some pricing. It's a very incredible episode. I'm so excited for you to come and join us and paddle in. So anyways, without further ado, let's listen to the episode. Paddle in. All right, we're duck diving into another episode of The Groundswell with today's guest, Blair Enns. Welcome.
Thank you, Scott. My pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks so much for joining us. So we're really excited to have you on here. And, you and I have had a couple conversations either before this podcast and before prior, and we've just jumped into so many great conversation topics. I think the first thing before we even begin sort of touching on some of those is let's just give everybody a little background of, who you are and what you're up to these days so we can kind of really sort of jump from there and kind of dive into some topics.
Yeah, I'm an ex-agency guy. I grew up professionally in advertising and design firms. I run a business called Win Without Pitching, which I launched in April of 2002. So we're approaching 20 years, getting closer to 20 years. And I originally conceived of it as a solo consulting practice to independent ad agencies and design firms. And it was essentially a lifestyle business that I run from my home, not my home, but from my the business is out of the home, but I run from my my home base, the remote mountain village where I live in Caslow, British Columbia, Canada. So it was a consulting practice. And then as my kids got older, and I would deliver a lot of consulting over the phone, and then I would start to travel a bit. And then as my kids, I have 4 kids, as they got older and didn't need me as much, I got more serious about the business. And in 2013, pivoted the business. I can't believe I just used that word, but I pivoted the business model from a solo consulting practice to a scaled up and scalable training company. So Win Without Pitching does sales and pricing training to creative professionals. And we do it through on-site training, through remote classrooms, and through one-on-one coaching.
So you're in Caslow, which for anybody that doesn't know where Caslow is, it's kind of as remote as it gets in Canada. It's not an easy place to get to, but it's absolutely stunning. How are you able to manage this, so deep in the interior?
Great question. I feel like I've cracked the code. I think of the few great things I've done in my life, probably the most rewarding has been to figure out how to run a business from a remote mountain village on the shore of a 90-mile long lake, population less than 900, a short 10-hour drive from Vancouver. So how am I able to do that?
Yeah.
In the early days when I was a consultant, I had a 1-800 number. I was trying to disguise the fact that I was in Caslow, British Columbia. So I would say we're just outside of Vancouver. But when I launched the business, the premium on the US dollar was so high. It was as high as it had ever been. It would have been silly for me to even sell into my home country. So I immediately focused on the US, and I realized, people in the US, they don't care if I'm in Caslow or I'm in Vancouver. So after a little while, I started being more honest about where I was, and people were not only okay with it, they're actually quite intrigued by it. And
As
you've
was
been
I.
here before.
I am. You know, yeah, yeah, several times cat skiing and well, actually, that's all I was doing is heli skiing, and cat skiing.
Yeah,
in
and
that
so
area.
there's a big the closest ski hill would be in 20 minutes from us would be Whitewater, but there's a healthy cat skiing and heli skiing operations around us, so we're kind of almost at the epicenter of that whole movement. Cat skiing was invented just up the lake from
Oh, it's the
us.
best
Yeah.
POW in the
Yeah, you
world.
got to tell that to my kids because they keep
Yeah, it's
saying,
incredible.
"Dad, take us to Japan. That's got the best POW in the world." And I keep saying, "No, you're a little spoiled. It's right here in your backyard."
No.
So it's not very often I speak to
So
somebody
good.
who not only knows where Caslow is, but who's been here. And so, as you can appreciate, Scott, it's paradise. It's a beautiful little mountain village in the middle of nowhere. And it's
I've even stayed at the Caslow Hotel.
did you before or after the renovation?
Oh, before. It was janky, but it was awesome.
Yeah, it had character in air quotes.
Character, that's the word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been beautifully renovated now, and it's a nice property.
Okay, cool. I think there's a little lesson in what you're just describing because I think a lot of our listeners are either dreaming of working at remote locations, being a digital nomad, or that isn't that almost anyone's entrepreneur dream is to somehow sit by a beach or live in a mountain and run your business. What are some things that you can sort of share that you've learned along the way to really capsule that? Because I think that one thing that you just brought forward was just be honest about it. And I think that actually is a great idea.
Well, I think as we're talking about this, and I'm thinking back, because for the 3 years before we moved to Caslow, I lived in Calgary, your home base. And I remember I was working for an agency there, and I had decided that we were going to, or my wife and I had decided we were going to move to Caslow and raise our family here and be closer to nature. And I was having a goodbye lunch with a client of mine. And this guy was fairly well off. He owned 4 Ferraris. And I told him what I was doing. I'm quitting the great job I had working for a great employer. And I was moving to the woods to live my life. And he said, I have the same dream. He said, forgive me. Are you independently wealthy? And I said, no. I said, I discovered a few years ago, actually it was just a year earlier when I was working for one of the largest ad agencies in the world. It was a horrible, horrible job. My boss wasn't very nice is the way I'll put it as politely as I can. And I found my confidence being eroded. I'm like, anybody who knows me knows I have more confidence than I deserve. I was shattered of confidence and I was very unhappy. And in that moment, I made some decisions. Right. So what I was saying to this, fast forward a year, what I'm saying to this wealthy client of mine who's saying like, how can you afford to do this? And I said to him, the biggest lesson I've learned in life is like, I'm willing to be poor to be happy. And so he said to me, I have the same dream as you. I just want to have enough money that I can kind of tell the world to go to hell, buy my own island. And I thought, wow, here we are. We have the same dream. I didn't really have any money to speak of at the moment. He had millions of dollars. I knew what he sold his last business for. But I had more freedom than him. And that's when I realized that, the power of, you prioritize happiness over wealth, then you're free. You are as free as a wealthy person. Now, he said, what are you going to do to earn a living? I said, I don't know. I have a vague idea about making furniture. Maybe I'll pump gas. Maybe I'll start a consulting company. I said, I don't know. And it was just a powerful lesson to me that I had more freedom than he did because I was willing to be poor to be happy. And now I'm no longer willing to be poor to be happy, but because I'm not in a situation where I have to make that decision. But if I were in that situation again, I know what I would choose. I would choose happiness. And if that meant I had to forego a whole bunch of material wealth or success, I would do it. But it was just so that's the biggest lesson I've learned is that ultimately led to the decision to move here, and I'll figure it out once I get here. And everything's worked out very well. I've published 2 books. I've got worldwide brand recognition in the markets that I serve. So touch wood, it's all worked out really well. But that the impetus for me to take the leap was really just because I realized how important it was to be happy.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're the top guy in the field around pricing and pitching without
Fishing without
paying
catching. It's
for the amount of
winning
energy it
without
takes for
pitching.
pitching.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yeah, winning without pitching. So it's quite incredible. I heard Tony Robbins. I think he says the quality of your life is something like proportionate to the amount of discomfort you're willing to live with, and I think to a certain degree, it's a huge life lesson in that you just proceeded about following, your values, and the rest just fell
I
into
don't
place.
know
Is that
the
fair to
advice
say?
I would give to other people based on that, other than I look back on the moment when I was really happy in my second last agency job in Calgary, the one I had moved to Calgary for, and it was really a horrible situation. There was nothing good about it. But when I look back on it now, I'm so grateful for having gone through the experience of being traumatized by this person and working in a kind of a fruitless situation, because it allowed me to make decisions, or forced me to make decisions that ultimately were the best decisions that I've ever made in my life. So I wouldn't, looking back on that, I would not trade that struggle for anything.
Interesting. Now, if you're thinking back to also what was the moment, what was the thought, what was the seed, or what was the lightning bolt moment that started you on this path, starting win without pitching? Because to me, like, that is something I'm really interested in, how you went from, hey, I might pump gas, to basically coming up with one of the most interesting topics I've ever seen in the space.
Great question. And I have to choose from the bank of stories. We are storytelling people. In fact, I think stories are really all that we have. So I have to choose from the stories that I can tell about this and pick one that's most relevant. When I left the large agency I was working with, the global agency, and I was about to move to Caslow, and we'd put our house up for sale, and just found out pregnant with child number 3, and I got a call from a headhunter offering me, or asking if I wanted to interview for what it was a really interesting job. And I was saying no on the phone. My wife was looking at me like, you take that interview. So I took the interview. I ended up going to work for this firm. I said, I'll work with you for a year. I'll help you build the office, and then I'm going to move to this little remote mountain village in Caslow. And a year ended up being 20 months before I finally pulled the pin. And now, Scott, I've forgotten your question. I've done the setup to the answer completely back to the question.
So that's okay. So what was the lightning bulb moment, or when, how did you just come up with, this is what I'm going to go out to the world with, this win without pitching concept?
So like, it's really, I knew I was going to move my family to this little village in the middle of nowhere. And what I didn't know was how I was going to earn a living. So I'd said to my boss, I said, I'll work with you for 12 months, build the office up. And then 12 turned into 20. And finally I said, I've got to go. I've got this like vision, this calling of living in this place. And my boss, we're having a goodbye lunch, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I have a vague idea of a consulting practice of doing business development consulting to creative firms. And he said, well, why don't you do some business development for me remotely while you're starting your consulting practice? So I did that for a year remotely. But as I was essentially, I wrote a book because I started, I'm a writer, I think through my fingers. I thought, well, I'll write down everything I know about agency new business development. And what I found, and I think we'll get to this topic, is if your book doesn't have an ideological framework, then it's probably not a very good book. So I was thinking about the ideology, the things I believe. And there's this thing, if your listeners aren't in the creative space, there's this thing in the ad agency and design firm space. It's called the pitch. And the pitch is a client-driven selection process where you're asked, or it's implied to you that it's in your best interest, to give your thinking away for free, to solve the client's problem as proof of your ability to solve it. And I was looking for an ideology around which to kind of base this business. And I just thought, if there's one thing that I hate, there's the one thing that's always frustrated me in doing new business development for agencies, it was the pitch. It just drove me crazy. I just felt so powerless. I felt like the client was calling all the shots, and it shouldn't be that way. So I arrived at the name Win Without Pitching first, the name of the consulting practice, and the original self-published book, which you can't get anymore. It's long gone. I used to sell it for $1,000 a copy. We we can come back and talk about that. I arrived at the name first, and once I had the name, which fell out of the ideology that was very meaningful to me, everything else fell into place. And there were a lot of business development consultants out there, but there was nobody who owned that ideology of win without pitching. And I had had enough experience in my own career working in agencies, not a lot, but I had enough to know that you could push back on this. You didn't have to cede all of your power to the client. You didn't have to acquiesce to all of their demands. You didn't have to pitch to give your ideas away for free, even though that's what was being asked and sometimes demanded of you. So I built on that ideology, and out of the ideology fell a business. And then the second book that was published, it wasn't self-published through my website, and it wasn't sold for $1,000 a copy, but in 2010, I published the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and that's gone on to sell very well. We're over 30,000 copies now, and it sells more every 9 years later, almost 9 years later. It continues to sell, pick up speed every year. It's really the ideology. Like Simon Sinek said it best, and I'm going to bungle this quote because I have a poor memory, but it's don't look to sell to people who need to buy what it is you have to sell. Look to sell to people who believe what you believe. And this idea of the pitch, so I couldn't be the only person in the agency business who was completely frustrated by the lack of power that I had in the pitch. So I put the ideology out there. First, I would write blog posts, and I wrote a blog post called 12 Proclamations for the New Year in this real manifesto-ish type voice. And that one really resonated with people. And I thought, I'm going to write a book on this. So I took that 12 proclamations, thing that I'm going to do differently in the new year. And I wrote the 12 proclamations of a win without pitching agency. I put it together in the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. And that really resonated. So it turns out it's a polarizing point of view because not everybody in the creative or marketing firm space thinks that free pitching is a problem. Usually if you're young enough, you love the adrenaline of staying up all night and working on the pitch. But that gets old. So not everybody thinks it's a problem. The bigger reason it's polarizing is not everybody thinks it can be done. They think the pitch is so highly ingrained. There's just no way to be able to secure a new account, advertising account in particular, without having to give all your thinking away for free. So for the 15 plus years, almost, I guess 18 years or so that I've been doing this, I've heard so many times people say to me, yeah, it's a nice theory, but there's no way it'll apply in my business. And I think that response, if everybody agrees with your point of view, your ideology, then it's not powerful because it really needs to be provocative. It really needs to polarize the audience. And if you're trying to play it safe, if you're trying to avoid criticism, if you're trying to get everybody to agree with you, then you're not going to end up with anything that's powerful. So I'm a little bit lucky. I like to provoke. I'm okay with people saying you're wrong or it can't be done. I'm okay with public criticism. I don't need everybody to like me. But I really did, I feel, get lucky in this point of view that has really polarized my audience and drawn a lot of that audience toward me. And some have gone running in the other direction. That's fine.
So one of the things I want to underscore for the listeners is that what you are proposing is more than just, headwinds and controversial. This is ingrained process and thinking over years. I mean, look at Mad Men, the pitch is like a big part of the dialogue of that show. And that is the agency culture. So this is like a cultural belief, no different than the world was flat. You're proposing something different and people are like, it can't be done. That is what is so interesting about what your work has done. And as I've been reading it, I'm just like floored that the industry, this has been around for some time, you're teaching, and I can't believe that this hasn't picked up more steam than it has. But it doesn't surprise me, though, that now it's actually catching on more because I think there's more of an open-minded thinking mindset in the agency than ever before. Am I right or wrong?
I think you're right. And I think some of the failure for it to catch on early really falls at my feet. I think when I was younger, I was very ideological and I would put things forward as it has to be this way. There's a right way and a wrong way. And as I age, I kind of knock the edges off a little bit, and I can see more of the gray, and I can see how, I don't, the people that I look up to and who offer advice, whether it's through paid engagements or the podcasts I listen to or the books that I read, I don't, I don't apply all of their thinking literally, absolutely. I take it on board, I make it my own, and then I apply it in the way that I think makes sense. And I've seen the world of gray between the black and white, and therefore I think since I've softened a little bit, some of those firms who are maybe put off by like the strongest expression of my ideology have kind of come into the fold. It's not as even the name Win Without Pitching. It's really the pitch is a symptom of the problem. It's not the problem itself. And we counsel our clients that, sometimes you have to pitch, but you want to pitch in those situations where you have changed the conditions in your favor. And I've got some simple research that I've done that shows that if you can gain some concessions in the sale, your odds of winning go from roughly 1 over 2n, with n being the number of firms under consideration, to greater than 1 in 2. So it's not as simple as either you're invited to a pitch, you say, no, we never pitch, I'll see you later. Or you go all in and pitch and do everything that's asked of you in every pitch. There's a lot of gray area in between. And as I've aged, I've seen the nuance of being able to guide people to navigate that gray area and to go into a pitch where they change the odds in their favor dramatically.
So when you're describing that, one of the things that intrigued me about our earlier conversation about my book and the advice you gave me, which is profoundly changing the way I'm looking at my book, which is point of view. You mentioned that earlier. You said, hey, having a really clear and unique point of view. When is that point of view too sharp, as you said, and when is how do you kind of like decide a point of view that's flexible but sharp enough to be effective? And further that, maybe describe your perspective on unique point of view.
The need for polarization, which you would think of as like a sharp point of view that polarizes the audience, is a function of competition density. So if you think of the size of the market that you're serving and then the number of direct competitors you have, basically how competitive the space is. If the space is really competitive and you want to stand out with, so you're selling coaching and there's a lot of lifestyle and business coaches out there, and so that's a competitive space. If you want to stand out, you need to have a polarizing point of view. If you've discovered a white space where there's nobody or very few people competing, there's no need in the beginning for you to have a polarizing point of view. You simply say, here's we specialize in this discipline for this market, helping these types of people solve these types of problems. And you can get away with kind of framing your value proposition that way. But as the space gets more competitive, your need for polarization increases. So when I started out, there were a few consultants out there, but I was kind of like, I launched in 2002, just in the very early days of the internet. I used to do email marketing, and I had a 70% response rate. 70 response, not open rate. This is back in the beginning.
What?
No, so this would be. I'm thinking of my
subscribers.
My last agency job, and so it would have been around 2000, 1999, 2000, and it's basically back then. Not everybody had an email address, so if you could get an email address, and I was selling into Silicon Valley from Canada. If I get somebody with an email address, they love the fact that they were getting business correspondence via email. Now, I'm 52. If you're 35 listening to this, you're thinking, what? A time like that actually existed? Yes, it actually existed. You'd send somebody an email and you would almost be guaranteed a response because it was so novel. And we all know what's happened to open rates over time. Mm-hmm. But as the space gets more and more competitive, you've got more and more direct competitors. The way you stand out is through your ideology.
Okay. So maybe touch on target, because you and I were talking about this earlier about, just almost like that speaks to a little bit of a unique point of view. maybe almost like how you want to target your audience.
Yeah, you were telling me, you're giving me some feedback on what I do and saying, well, it's really relevant. What you do is really relevant to not just creative firms, but other types of professional firms and all kinds of other types of businesses. Coaching business is consulting businesses. And I said, yeah. And I hear that a lot. I get people who say to me, you should really broaden out. You should take this book, The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and you should write it for professional firms, or you should write it for everybody, rewrite it. You should broaden it out. My point of view on this is that the target is smaller than the market, and the target is that at which you aim, and the market is that at which you would be happy to hit. And this is controversial or backwards for some people. We think that the larger the market, the better. So if we take my business as an example, and if I were to broaden out, so we do selling and pricing training for creative professionals, and people say, well, it's not just creative professionals. You could be relevant to all other types of businesses. So if I said selling and training for businesses or some version of that, I broaden out my market, but I also broaden out my competitive field. And then my true expertise that I bring to the table becomes, it's not as meaningfully different to those people outside of my target market. So I still continue to aim at the small target, and I routinely get, or I should say we routinely get, inquiries and clients from outside of the creative firm space. So recently, somebody who teaches maths, an organization that teaches math skills, just signed up for a workshop that we have coming up. I had the former CFO of one of the world's largest companies, who's now a leadership consultant, attend one of my most recent workshops. Our largest client for a year or so was a global consulting company. We work with staffing companies, accounting firms, and you're thinking, well, none of these are creative firms the way we describe it. And the mistake, because the target is creative firms, we're seen as meaningfully different. We kind of, I wouldn't say own this space, but we have a very strong point of view, as we talked about, in this space. So we're known. We get talked about. People from outside of our target market get exposed to our thinking and our ideology, and they say what you said to me, Scott, which is, well, this is relevant to my business too. And then they come to us and they buy services from us, training, coaching, etc. Excuse me. And what I'm still doing business with these people. They probably represent 25%, maybe 20% of our client base. But as soon as I changed the value proposition to include all of them, then I water down that which makes me different. So I had a friend of mine say to me, he's a solo consultant. I was talking to him years ago now, and I said, how's business? And he said, business is really good. He said, none of what I'm doing is in my target market, but because I'm so narrowly positioned, I'm seen as so different. I'm so interesting to people that it starts a lot of conversations. And then somebody will say, hey, can you also do this for me? And I say, sure. So he said, I'm busy. My positioning is working for me, but it's creating business outside of my target market. And I think that's the way we should all think about. I don't know if this scales to like product companies, et cetera, but I think if you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur or you're a coach or you're running a small service-oriented business, I think this is the proper way to think about it. Your target should be smaller than your market, and you recognize that people outside of your target will find relevance in what you do, and they will be attracted to you as well.
Okay. So one of the things that I find fascinating about what you're saying is your value proposition of win without pitching and focusing on creatives is, I don't think of any other business that's more difficult to price than creative. So you've probably picked the solving the problem, one of the most difficult areas of pricing and creating sort of like demonstrating value and trying to price that, then creative would, in that regard, it's easy to say, well, if you can teach somebody in creative to be able to price that, then certainly you can use my business or you can impact my business. I don't know what your thought is on that, but also what do you think about that as a strategy if someone's listening to this and going, hey, maybe my target market is really small, but if I can champion solving this problem to this very difficult niche segment, everyone else will be going, well, if you can solve that problem, geez, you could probably solve my problem.
Yeah, and that's the way you should grow your business. So you pick a niche and you come to dominate that niche. And then you're faced with these questions of, could I expand into these other areas? And I'm faced with that question. I've launched a consulting company as an experiment with a friend and colleague in Australia that serves professional firms. And it's an experiment so we're going after professional firms in a different geographical market. We already serve Australia through Win Without Pitching, but it's just an example of, okay, let's try this. Let's launch this venture as an experiment. I'm probably at the place where I could choose to broaden Win Without Pitching across to the greater professions, but it's already kind of happening without me having to do it. I'll give you two great examples in kind of more everyday type of businesses. There's a woman in the little village I live in who used to cut hair. She's now a miner, interestingly enough, but she used to cut my hair and she was very good at it. She's the only one around that was very good at it. And I would talk to her about what I do and talk about the importance of specialization. And she said when she launched her hairstyling practice in another market, a larger town than the one we live in, she put out an ad saying specializing in curly hair. So she's got very curly hair. My wife has curly hair. She knows how difficult it is to get somebody to cut and style her hair properly. So she launched as a curly hair specialist. Boom, instantly filled, known. And then her friends, so her clients would be a great source of referrals. So at some point she let go of that curly hair specialization. So among the people in her market who had curly hair, they saw her as a specialist, but she grew her market from there and just dropped the declaration of specialization, even though they're still known that way by the people in her, what you would consider the smallest concentric circle of the target market. So that's one example. Another example is somebody in my life who's a financial planner. And when she started out, so there's a hugely competitive space, right? And she thought, she came out of another business where she worked in another business where they had served parents of children with Down syndrome. And she kind of by fluke began to specialize in financial planning because apparently there's some special financial planning needs around parents who have kids with certain disabilities, and it just happened to be Down syndrome. And so because she's known in that niche, she had some clients who had children with Down syndrome. The word spreads within the niche because in a vertical market or in a niche like this, clients talk to each other, and that's how you build your reputation. So she built the base of her business there and then broadened out from there. And Peter Thiel talks about this in his book 0 to 1 Notes on Startups or Inventing the Future, I think is the subtitle. I think that might be the best basic business book ever written. And he talks about this, the way you want to grow. First, you dominate a niche. You build a dominant position in the niche, and sometimes that takes a point of view. Sometimes it's as simple as just being the only one who specializes in that niche. So you dominate that niche either through just the act of specialization or specialization and an ideology. And then you look to spread from there. So you can go in the next, so my friend and relative who used to specialize in parents of kids with Down syndrome, she could broaden that out to parents of children with any kind of disability or anybody with health style implications or medical challenges that affect financial planning decisions, etc. So there are just different ways to scale up once you dominate a niche. But I think that's some of the best, most overlooked advice on starting and growing a business out there is first dominate a niche and then grow from there.
Great advice. And I loved your stories that you added in there. One of the questions, not really questions, one of the things I'd like you to see if you can kind of share with us a story where the concept of someone that's one business that was, really difficult without pitching that you can share or kind of describe to really help people sort of visualize how these principles could be applied to their business.
So you're looking for a story of a firm that's been able to go from pitching all the time to winning without pitching.
Yeah, transformational example maybe.
So yeah, I can give you a bunch of different examples. I'm thinking of a client of mine just went public recently in London last year at a conference, stood up at a conference, said, from this moment forward, we no longer pitch for free. I just checked in with her last to ask how it's going. She said it's going really well. I mean, I have some other numbers that associated with her business, but I can't give away too much away. She's also
looking for numbers, just maybe the story of like them overcoming. Just, it doesn't matter if it's just agency, but it probably is just.
So here's how you think about it. Here's how anybody who's done this, anybody who's been able to go from having no power in the buy-sell relationship to suddenly having power and changing the way their services are bought and sold. It starts with, I've essentially alluded to the model, is 2 steps. Step number 1, if you want to learn to win without pitching or to gain power back in the buy-sell relationship, is you change the power structure, and you change that through positioning. So in the creative firm world, and you will remember this from your time in this space, it's typically the client that has the power in the buy-sell relationship. And I've asked this question to thousands of people. Okay, who has the power in the client agency relationship typically? And everybody says it's the client. Great. What is the source of the client's power in this relationship? And the first answer to that question is almost always money. The source of their power is the fact that they have the money. And that is the wrong answer, but it's everybody's first answer, almost everybody's first answer. The client's power the source of the client's power in this situation is not their checkbook. Their power to push you around, to dictate to you how your services will be bought and sold, to impose profit margin caps on you. And this happens in the agency business where clients want to know what you pay your people. They feel like it's in their right to dictate to you how much profit you can make. The source of that power comes from the availability of substitutes. The fact that, or more correctly, the alternatives that they have in their mind, the alternatives that they see to hiring your firm. So if you want to change the power structure in the buy-sell relationship, the first step is to set yourself apart and build a meaningfully different business. Now, in a creative firm, we're kind of overpopulated with undifferentiated creative firms for reasons that are specific to the creative personality. Creative people are drawn to problems that they haven't solved before. Therefore, they build businesses that let them solve all kinds of different problems. In a creative firm, the way that you gain power back through positioning is you narrow your focus and you build a depth of expertise. So if you think of cutting curly hair, let's use that because that's a simple, common example. Anybody with curly hair knows that if somebody does not have experience cutting curly hair, they're probably not very good at it. There's all kinds of things that are difficult about it. Yeah, it's implied. It's implied. So imagine so let's take my wife. She's got curly hair and she's looking for somebody to cut her hair, and she wanders into a new market and she sees 4 or 5 hairstylists on the same street. And let's say the prices are all the same and one is a curly haired specialist. She's going to go to the curly haired specialist all the time. Now, I would suggest my wife, who does not like to spend money where she doesn't have to spend money, she would probably pay a premium of 50 to 100% to get her hair cut by a curly hair specialist. Because we will not put up with a generalist when we can access a specialist, and we're willing to pay more. You have some power in the buy-sell relationship. You have carved out a differentiated position and you've communicated that you're meaningfully different when you can command 2 things simultaneously. Number 1 is a sales advantage, so you win more often than not. And number 2 is a price premium. You win while charging more. You have built an expertise-based business when you can win in a competitive situation while charging more. And so if you can do that, if you have the power to command a price premium, then you also have the power to push back on a flawed selection process or procurement process and say to the client, listen, we're not in the business of giving our best ideas away for free. So if we're going to have some discussions to figure out whether or not it makes sense to work together, we're going to have to take some alternative steps here. We're going to have to put your selection, your arduous, often ridiculous selection process aside. And I wouldn't suggest you use that language, but we're going to have to put that aside. Let's just take an alternative step together. So 2 steps to winning without pitching. Number 1, change the power structure, power dynamics in the buy-sell relationship. And number 2, leverage that power to change how your services are bought and sold. And that's like, there's no easy answer to how you do that. You essentially say, listen, we're not going to do that. You start with no, and you say, let's do this instead. And that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. Entrepreneurs in general, you get to the first level of success in entrepreneurship by working really hard and saying yes to everything. And then this guy, Blair Enns, comes along and says, start specializing, start saying no, start pushing back. And that isn't, not a lot of people are comfortable with that.
So one of the first things that comes to mind is you've rationalized it. You created a strategy. You got principles. You've got an outline. You've got examples. All those things that the rational side of the brain goes, I get this. How do you help people with the mindset? Because I feel like that's almost a bigger hurdle. Like you must have some coaching or techniques, or what advice do you have somebody to break through the mentality to have the confidence to execute against this?
Oh yeah, that has been one of my biggest learnings in the last 10 years, and it's probably 8 or 10 years ago, where I realized that I'm teaching people what to do in a sale. I'm teaching them to push back, to challenge, to ask for concessions, etc. And I'm thinking it's just I have the answer. I can teach you the skill. And then at the end of a workshop, I was taking questions, and one woman said to me, I have a question. Now that I know what to do, how do I bring myself to do it? She used another phrase, referenced a piece of the male anatomy. Said, how do I grow I'll use the word spine instead. How do I grow the spine to do this? And everybody laughed, and I laughed off the question, and I didn't really have an answer. So I spent a couple years thinking about that. And I came to the decision that it really does start with mindset. I can tell people what to do in a sale, and I would refer to that as sales process. And process, as you know, Scott, is just Canadian for process. I can give them points of sales process. In this situation, do this. But that seemingly contrarian specific to do, if it's not layered over a general pattern of expert behavior, then it's going to seem, there's going to be some dissonance. Your clients are going to look at you funny. And so underpinning these specific points of sales process is this general pattern of behaving like the expert. Just behave. Don't be too needy. Don't lean on passion and enthusiasm too much. Be professional, be clinical, be selective, behave like the other professionals in your life, the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, etc., that you work with. So just operate on that level of professionalism. But underpinning that, how do you bring yourself to behave like the expert? It really comes down to mindset, and that's the word that you use. So we spend a lot of time working on the conversations that people have with themselves, the thoughts that are in their heads. Because if you are not thinking the right thoughts, then you will not behave like the expert. And if you try to apply the training that we give to people, it's just not going to work. It's going to seem so weird when you're generally behaving like the vendor. You're being this polite, compliant rule follower in the sale, and then all of a sudden you start to use some of our techniques. It's just going to seem so incongruous to the client. You'll probably piss them off. So mindset is everything, and we have a framework for that. In fact, our clients have this recording that's about 3 minutes long of me in my most Zen-like voice going through this mantra that we call the Jedi mantra. It's just like they repeat it to themselves to get them into the proper headspace before they pick up the phone or go into the web meeting or go into the actual physical meeting. So I've just found over the years that if you don't start with mindset, you're not going to affect much behavioral change.
I love that. That is insanely cool that you do that, because I think it's absolutely critical, because it's like if you're in a sale, the amount of energy, your confidence, and your mindset, if you don't have that lined up and you're going into any situation, I even notice it with my dogs. We're trying to train them. Our our dog counselor or coach, whatever, was saying, hey, you need to make sure energy and your physical presence is different, because they can read that. And same in the sale, right? If you're sheepishly going, hey, I think you should maybe look at this new model, they're just not going to buy in. So it starts with mindset, and then it's the amount of energy that you're able to kind of push through. Would you not agree that's going to help them buy into it? If I find that when I was pitching clients creative, and if I could get myself where I'm like, I am so jazzed about this creative, even if the idea was just okay, the level of enthusiasm that was behind the idea was matched by their level of enthusiasm to accept it.
Yeah.
That was just me, my experience.
Yeah. And so I'm holding in my hands, you can't see this because the audio medium, a pair of Win Without Pitching socks. It's got our logo on the ankles. And on the bottom of one sock, it says, I am the expert. And the bottom of the second sock, it says, I am the prize. So we refer to these as confidence socks, because the first statement in our first part of our 4-statement mantra, and the Jedi mantra, is, I am the expert, I am the prize. It's just a reminder that I am the prize to be won in this relationship, because we tend, when we're selling, no matter what we're selling, we tend to think that the client is the prize to be won. We in the creative world, we call it winning new business, like winning, like it's a lottery. It's ridiculous. Why isn't the client winning the right to work with our firm? So mindset wise, you just recognize that you are a focused expert. You have this deep expertise. You have incredible ability to add often enormous amounts of value to people's lives and businesses. You need to value that yourself and recognize that you're an expert, and you are the prize as much as the client is. And if you don't see that, if you don't believe it, if you're not having that conversation with yourself before you open your mouth and say something to your prospective client in the sale, that's going to be communicated. They won't believe it either. The roles will be set. You will be relegated to vendor. So you really have to just stop and talk to yourself and say, listen, I have some deep expertise here that's of high value. I am the prize to win in this relationship.
That is some powerful training that you're putting out there. And if anyone that's listening, go back and replay what you just said, because I think that a lot of people underestimate the power of the words that they use, or the power of the industry norms and the words they use in those norm situations. And if you change those, they can change everything.
Everything in life is subjective, to the point where I'm not even convinced there's an objective external reality anymore. Everything is subjective. Right. So it all begins, we're just living stories, right? So somebody once said, your past, present, and future are just stories that you tell yourself. And you're going into a sale and you're going to tell a story. What's the story that you're telling yourself? And if in that story, if you're not the hero, if you're not the prize to be won, if you don't recognize the value that you contribute to other people, then that will be communicated. So yeah, it's all, when we didn't win the sale, when we look back on any type of failure, we tend to get more objective in our measures. We think, oh, well, this didn't happen here. I missed some steps here, et cetera. But really, I think we succeed based on the more subjective measures, and it begins with how we're feeling about ourselves, the conversations we're having with ourselves about us, and then it moves into the conversations that we have with others. And I think, that looking backwards and saying, "Oh, we didn't do these things properly," et cetera. We try to measure things after the fact to make sense of things, but really, in the moment, it's just pure subjective experience that's really hard to measure.
Right. And I think a lot of people, okay, so maybe I'm not 100% confident. I'm not quite ready. I'm going to test this idea. Tell me if this would resonate with you, because I've kind of done this to myself, where I'm like in a situation where I'm like, okay, this is a really big client. To get myself in that state of confidence about that I'm the prize, I would actually rely on past stories, which is examples of work that I've done, the how happy the client was and the results that were there, and how symbiotic the relationship was because the client overcame their doubt and are now happily along. And it's, I think, what you called the double thank you in your book. to me, that was when I got myself in state, was able to kind of, sort of go back to that frame of mind when I was so happy that the client was so happy, and we both mutually just like, this is a win. And that gave me this sort of the story to tell them, but it put me in this state of mind where I was emotionally prepared to say, and I should be doing that for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great example and idea. You go back to the past, your own past stories of success to remind yourself that you are in the business of generating success for others. And so with those stories fresh in your mind, you can go ahead and tell a new story with your client. I was listening to your introduction to this podcast last week, Scott, and I was really struck by your story of being trapped in the Miami airport, having no money, and then you grab Awakening the Giant Within, and then so just think back to that moment, your mindset before reading that book versus your mindset after reading that book, and the outcome that you achieved of getting a free ticket back to Calgary, 100% was attributable to your mindset, and you changed your mindset through some exposure to material. So you can read a book, you can think of the stories of success in your life, you can repeat the Jedi mantra to yourself. I'll give your listeners the full, the short version of it. It's 4 statements. I am the expert, I am the prize. I'm on a mission to help. I can only do that if you let me lead. All will not follow, and that's okay. And it's basically, I'm the expert, I'm the prize. I'm a focused expert. I have incredible ability to help you here, help create value for you. Therefore, I am the prize to be won in the relationship. I'm on a mission to help speaks to higher purpose. And I'm sure you talk about this, this idea of tapping into something that's bigger than you. So our purpose, our positioning that's stated as kind of a mission statement is, I'm on a mission to change the world. Creative services are bought and sold the world over, one firm at a time. And if the firm that I'm talking to isn't signing up for this today, that's okay. So I'm the expert, I'm the prize, I'm on a mission to help. When you tap into a sense of mission, especially in a sale, you transcend the sale, and you gain moral authority because you're working from a higher sense of purpose. And then I can only do this if you let me lead speaks to a bigger issue of, if you are the expert, you're selling any version of expertise, you have to be seen as the expert in the sale. You can't be the polite, compliant rule follower who follows the client's selection process and then think you're going to put the leadership hat on afterwards. If what you're selling to your client is some sort of coaching or leadership or expertise of any kind, you need to be able to be in the leadership position in the relationship, and the sale is the sample. So if you're not leading in the sale, you won't be allowed to lead in the engagement. So that's where that third line of, I can only do that if you let me lead. And the fourth line is one of detachment. All will not follow, and that's okay. And again, that's transcending the sale and letting go of the outcome. I'm the expert, I'm the prize, I'm on a mission to help. I only do that if you let me lead. If you don't see me as the expert, if you don't let me lead, then this isn't meant to happen today, and that's okay. And I'm not going to try to talk you into anything. So there it is, the Jedi mantra. I am the expert, I am the prize, I'm on a mission to help. I can only do that if you let me lead. All will not follow, and that's okay.
So that actually, I think, is incredibly powerful. If anybody's listening and going, oh, that's woo-woo, to me, I'd be saying, okay, then you're probably not a performer. Performers actually, in athletics and any sort of top profession, they're looking for tools to be able to master their mind and create patterns and be able to have it at the tip of their tongues so that they have control of their thinking as opposed to their monkey mind controlling them. And I think what you just suggested is unbelievably powerful. It changes you from a victim to a victor. And Tony Robbins, he has one. It's called Now I'm the Voice. It goes, now I'm the voice. I will lead, not follow. I will believe, not doubt. I will create, not destroy. I'm a force for good. I'm a leader. Defy the odds. Set a new standard. Step up. And that's what many top athletes and people who I've met are become multimillionaires because they use those incantations, if you want to call them that, to drive them to get the results they need so that their mind is serving them instead of letting the, thoughts and doubts be muddled in with what they're trying to do. And that's a big differentiator in my mind. And so I had no idea you did that, and that just your stock just went right up. I think that's incredible.
Well, thanks. I'm all goosebumpy from listening to that Tony Robbins one. If I would have been listening to this 6 or 7 years ago, I may have turned off the podcast by now because it would have been too woo-woo for me. But as I was exploring mindset and I came up with this mantra, I put it out there. I was so nervous when I tested it amongst our clients, but it just took the people. As you say, the people who succeed, they are open to this stuff. They know how powerful mindset. So I think of that Tony Robbins mantra. There's no room for negative thought after that. There is no room. You put your chest back, your shoulders back, your chest forward, you stand up straight, you say that to yourself, and then you go do what you have to do. And so you can layer in you, anybody else. We can teach 1 million people techniques. If they are not thinking the right thoughts, if they do not believe that they can do this and they are worth it, then it's not going to work.
Totally 100% agree. This is incredible. So I want to finish with one other concept. So, looking at your value proposition, which is to help creative professionals win more business at a higher price and a lower cost of sale. We've tackled how you win more business and lower the cost by eliminating that process. But the one thing that I think a lot of people are, call it fearful or don't understand the process, is higher price.
Yeah.
And you've just released a book that I read that I'm just diving into and freaking out over. It's called Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour. And this, if you're in creative agency, professional services, I'm telling you right now, go grab this book. It's freaking epic. So what I'd love for you to do is kind of maybe talk about the principles and, pricing and can you help somebody? And I realize they got to read the book to really get the full grasp of it. But at a high level, how can you help people or help people understand how can they price better?
Yeah. And you alluded to this earlier and saying, well, if you can help people get more for creative, then that's a feat. You can think of pricing as, depending on the type of business you have, like pricing is either mostly science or mostly art. So if you run a product or productized services company, pricing is more science than art. Like as an example, they say there are 90,000 data points that go into the price of an airline seat. And the price of that seat, not just that seat, but all seats available in North America, change 15 million times a day. So that is completely science and data driven. If you run a customized services firm where you have a small number of clients and you can't kind of scale infinitely, then every engagement should be a creative act, and every pricing engagement, every comp plan should be seen as a creative act. And so many businesses are caught in the middle. They should be customized, but they're quasi-productized and they get caught in the mushy middle. That's another topic. But if you run a customized services firm, pricing is mostly art. So it's about getting some basic concepts down, and then it's really about being able to have conversations. So at the basic concept level, you think of it this way. The most basic concept is there are really only 3 things you can price or sell. And this applies to my world of creative firms, and you can extrapolate it. The listener can extrapolate it to their world. You can sell the inputs of time and materials. So you can sell hours, days, sprints, whatever. You can sell the deliverables. So a design firm, the deliverable might be the website, might be the logo, might be the ad campaign in an ad agency. So you can price and sell that, or you can price and sell the outcomes or the value that you propose to create. So it might be the sales based on, you can price it based on the amount of profit that you expect your logo, website, ad campaign, et cetera, to generate. So those are 3 different ways to think about pricing. And so each of them is valid, but as you move from pricing inputs and outputs to pricing based on value, you get a whole new level of profitability that becomes available to you when you start to let go of the tracking of time and you start to think in terms of selling and pricing and selling value. Now, this is a really big topic, and I'll try to hit the high notes here because we don't have a lot of time for it, but
we'll take all the time you want. Go.
It's a really big topic. One of the underpinning principles is the idea of this subjective theory of value, the idea that value is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholders, and different people value different things differently at different times. I talk about this in the book, and in all of the lectures that I do on the subject, I show this slide of two logos, the Nike logo and the Pepsi logo. And so in a room full of designers, I'll say, okay, graphic designers, do you guys design logos? Yep. What do you charge for a logo? And there will be quiet because it's usually their competitors they're from the same geographic market. And somebody will throw it a number, and it might be 5,000 or 10,000. Let's say it's 5,000. And then somebody will immediately double it. 10,000. It's just this little showmanship. Somebody throws out a price, somebody else doubles it. And I say, well, let's look at these. I said, no. So eventually somebody says, well, that depends. And I say, right, that's the correct answer. The answer to what's the price of a logo depends. What does it depend on? And we can't get everybody to agree what it depends on. So I show a picture of the Nike logo. And I say, in 1971, design student Carolyn Davidson was paid $35 to design the Nike logo, $200 in today's money. So logos are worth $200. Then I show the Pepsi logo, and I say, in 2008, design firm Arnell was hired by PepsiCo to redesign the Pepsi logo. Does anybody know what they were paid? The answer is $1 million. So logos cost $1 million. Logos cost between $200 and $1 million. What's the difference? So the one is 5,000 times the other price. So the answer is correct. It depends. What does it depend on? It's not the quality of the logo. One isn't 5,000 times better. It's not the amount of time it took. It's the value of that logo to the client. And then I tell the story, and I tell it in the book, but I'll ask the audience, do you think $200 was fair to Ms. Davidson, the designer? Most people say yes, but some people are adamant, no, she was taken advantage of. And then I say, do you think $1 million to PepsiCo was that fair to the client? And most people say, yeah, I think it's fair. But some people are adamant it wasn't fair. And I'll say, I think if Peter Arnell had read my book, he could have got $20 million for the Pepsi logo. Because at about the same time PepsiCo redesigned the Pepsi logo, they also redesigned the Tropicana Pure orange juice packaging. And when they launched the new packaging, sales plummeted by $37 million in 2 months before they quickly restored the old packaging to the shelves. And so I extrapolate, that's a PepsiCo brand. I extrapolate that to the Pepsi flagship brand. If they had redesigned the Pepsi logo and sales had plummeted by the equivalent percentage of volume, it would have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. So what is the value of a logo? Therefore, what should the price of a logo be? So you could sell, back to my original point on this, you could sell the time, you could price it based on the time it took you to do it. You could price it based on the market value, in air quotes, of the deliverable. So the inputs of time and material, the outputs of the deliverable. Or you could price based on the value that you create. And when you do that, if you put some compensation at risk, so Peter Arnell could have said, listen, I'll charge you $2 million. He could have gotten creative and said, it's $2 million to redesign the logo. Or I'll charge you a base fee of $200,000. And if sales don't drop in the 60 days after it rolls out, you pay me an $800,000, or a $1 million bonus.
Right. So it's like that's the risk management or something, right?
Yeah. And if sales go up by X percent, you pay me another million and another million, et cetera, et cetera. So he could have put some of his compensation at risk. Now, the point is, it's a some, especially young designers, will think, well, $1 million for a logo, that's not fair to the client. But in the context, it's just a drop in the bucket because the value of that logo to the client. So a logo is a really difficult one to ascribe value to. So if you can do it with a logo, you can do it with all kinds of businesses. Marketing firms that are in the business of generating sales, leads, et cetera, for clients, they should be asking themselves, in this case, does it make sense to price this engagement based on the value we propose to create? Or should we go back to the way that we always do it, and that's sell time? And if the answer is yes, it makes sense to price based on value, the next question is, are we willing to put some of that compensation at risk? It's not mandatory, but if you do, you're likely to make even more money.
Interesting. I don't know how many times I've actually, in a low-priced engagement, given advice or done things that transformed their business, and I just didn't even value my own advice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and you look back afterwards. It's an exercise we do in the workshops. Is we teach a bunch of principles, and we teach you how to conduct a value conversation, which is a part of like extrapolating or uncovering the most value you can create. And then we have you go back in time and think of a situation where you underprice something, and we have you reprice it. And often, people just look at, what they were paid versus the value that they created and what they could have been paid. And often it's multiple.
So that you should almost call it the regret process. It's like, because what Tony does actually, and Tony Robinson, he's got a process to really help you drive change forward, is to go back to poor decisions or the current, habit or something you want to overcome, and extrapolate what does that cost you, or what will it cost you in the future 10, 20 years. And that drives deeper, your emotional decision to go, I need to break through this. So you're kind of doing almost a version of that, because it's almost a reality check of like, that stung, and here's how I would remedify it or change that. Sorry.
Yeah. The biggest barriers to charging more are really in your mind. Again, just like selling, when we were talking about this earlier, you really have to you have to overcome the mental hurdles that are in your mind. What's fair, and we get this notion of fairness that's tied to hourly rates. It's absolutely ridiculous. The number one.
What is fairness?
Yeah, well, so fairness, and I grappled with this for a while when I was researching the book. So first, I talked about the subjective theory of value. Value is really, we all value things differently at different times, and that wasn't always the case. That's been this has been understood for about 120 years, but for about 130 years before that, the reigning theory of value was the labor theory of value that said, well, we can all measure the value of something based on the value of the inputs that go into it. And then around 1905, three different economists arrive at the theory that reigns today, the subjective theory of value. But there's still questions around what's fair. And fairness, the same principle applies to fairness. And the biggest mistake we make with fairness is we confuse and combine egalitarianism with fairness. The fact that egalitarianism, that we should all have the same outcome, or the same. What's fair is that everybody has the same thing. That's not true. That's just true in your mind, but you are not the arbiter of somebody else's fairness. You can't decide what's fair to somebody else. You can only decide what's fair to you. And so people who have, big hearts and are socially conscious, they tend to get hung up on this idea that charging too much isn't fair, because their idea of fairness is not the same as the person on the other side of the table. And B, they sometimes have this zero-sum mentality when it comes to business. This idea that if I have $1, somebody else doesn't have $1. If I have $1, I've taken it from somebody else. And if that's how you view business, you misunderstand the global world of trade, how value is created in the world. And it's the biggest self-limiting belief that will impair your ability to make money from the value that you create for others.
Wow, that is well said. I mean, you think about how many people in wellness, healing, this rising industry, and they're there to serve people. And I've noticed this in my experience with helping them sort of overcome marketing themselves because they feel guilty about it, that, they're just here to serve. But they just need to understand that it takes money to make impact. And if your bigger underlying value is to have a bigger impact, serve more people, then you need to really think a lot differently. At least that's how I've been tackling that. But what you just described there is going to be an audio clip that I'm going to be sending a few people. That was incredible.
It's, part of my own journey and just learning about this is I realized I had a bit of that block myself. Not too bad. I've been pretty comfortable with the topic of money, but I think I don't think there's many people out there who have a really healthy attitude towards money. I think there's a small number of people in the world who we would think of as greedy, or they make money by hurting others, not helping others. But the vast majority of people make money in the world by helping others, and therefore they should see money, dollar bills, as certificates of appreciation. And also, I'd say the majority of people they're not greedy. They don't feel their unhealthy relationship with money, that they feel dirty by having more. And if there's one thing I could do for people listening, if they have a hard time, if they don't have a good relationship with money, is I would just free them of this notion that you can't get rich without hurting somebody or taking money from others. You get rich by helping people and by creating extra value in the world. The reason the labor theory of value imploded is it could never explain profits and losses. Adam Smith coined the theory in his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations. But he could never explain profits and losses with this labor theory of value. And Karl Marx came along and said, I'll tell you what profit is. Profit is excess value stolen from the worker. So he used Smith's labor theory of value to build in part, his exploitation theory of capitalism. We understand today that profit is the excess value created that is claimed by the provider. It's extra value. So you referenced the double thank you moment. Like, you hire me to do something for you. I hand over the work or the service. You hand over the check. We shake hands. We both say thank you. We both mean it. We are both better off. We have created value in the world together. We are both better off. Nobody has taken from the other. Each of us has made the other better off. That's how trade works. That's how people are lifted out of poverty. That is the core, that is the best part of capitalism. And that is something that you really should embrace, this idea of the double thank you moment, and you are helping people be better off, and they are gladly willingly paying you lots of money in appreciation for the value that you help create.
Boom. I think that's the wrap up comment right there, and a double thank you to you. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And did you have anything more you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you back to you. I know we've had a couple of conversations before this, and it's great to turn the mic on and record some of this. I love what you're doing, and I really am appreciative of the chance to have these conversations, and I hope they help the listener.
Oh, I think this is going to be one of the most trending episodes I've ever dropped. It's going to affect a lot of people. And thank you for sharing your whole life experience and your insights that you're able to share. If you could just maybe share, where people can find you, or you'd like them to follow you, just share that so they can type it in their browser or their phone, whether they're listening to, just to kind of catch up with you and learn more from you.
Yeah, I'm Blair Enns on Twitter, winwithoutpitching.com. You'll find most about me and my business. And if you're interested in the book, Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour, you can get that only at pricingcreativity.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining my show. And I'm just so appreciative. This has been an epic hot podcast. So thanks again.
Thanks.
Okay, everyone, that's another episode. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Just the download links and all the show notes will be just in the notes in your iTunes, Spotify, or whatever. And thank you again. Mahalo.